Trevor Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 28th of June of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where during the previous 24 hours both the Russians and the Ukrainians continued attacking each other. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning reported that the Russians during the overnight attack used around 150 drones and missiles altogether to attack the territory of Ukraine, and the most important thing is that the Russians were using ballistic missiles of Iskander type, and the Russians were using hypersonic missiles of Zircon type. The sources reported that the Russians were attacking this territory in the southeastern parts of the city of Kiev. Lots of explosions, lots of different pictures were published exactly from this area, and the most important thing is this territory has been attacked by the Russians twice since the beginning of the 25th of June of 2026. The previous time the Russians attacked the territory of the city of Kiev, its southeastern parts on the 26th of June of 2026. And if you remember, we had this video where we could see the consequences of attack. Some ammo depot was destroyed as a result of the Russian attack, and I believe you remember these pictures of a black smoke rising over the city of Kiev, and these are the consequences of attack through the southeastern parts of the city of Kiev between the 25th and the 26th of June of 2026. And as you can see, just 2 days after, the Russians once again attacked this part of the city of Kiev. When talking about this territory, there is a military, probably former military base in this area, and we have several facilities that most likely the Ukrainians were using for drone production purposes. Moving further, another important thing, the Russians used once again hundreds of drones, and we have a very important update, very important piece of news from the area between the cities of Dnipro and Kharkiv. Now we can say that there are no more gas stations along the M29 road that connects the cities of Dnipro and Kharkiv. During the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, the Russians published dozens of videos on the matter of how the Russians were destroying gas stations along the M29 road. Let's discuss everything in details. We have a gas station right exactly in the area of M30 and M29 roads. Here we have this picture, and according to this picture, as you can see, this gas station was completely destroyed by Russians as a result of a drone attack. Moving further, just several kilometers to the north along M29 road, and we are coming to the territory between M18 and M29 roads, where we can see at least 2 gas stations that were also destroyed by Russians. And pro-Ukrainian sources published lots of videos of how fire crews and fire teams were trying to extinguish the fire. So 2 gas stations, 2 more gas stations were destroyed along the M29 road. Now we are moving along the same road further in the northern direction, and we have another gas station, but this time in the area of the city of the village by the name of Druzhba. As for this gas station, we have a video where we can see the consequences of attack, and we see that according to this video, as the results of attack, this gas station was also reduced to ruins. Moving further, and now we're getting another gas station between M18 and M29 roads. Here we have more pictures on this matter. Another gas station was destroyed, and another video was published by pro-Russian sources. So summarizing everything, now we can see that one of the most important logistic roads between the cities of Dnipro and Kharkiv has been destroyed by Russians. Another important thing, that this logistic road, one of the most important ones, was destroyed by Russians. Furthermore, we know that the Russians have already destroyed almost every single gas station through the city of Zaporozhye. The Russians began attacking gas stations along N08 road between the cities of Zaporozhye and Dnipro. And furthermore, we know that the Russians have already destroyed lots of gas stations through the city of Nikopol and along R73 road. So basically, right now, what we can say is that this territory that we are right now marking with the black arrow, is from now on doesn't have gas stations, which means that a very big cluster of logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine has collapsed. Of course, this situation doesn't mean that the soldiers and the forces along the line of combat contact don't have fuel for military purposes, but obviously now the Ukrainians need more time and more energy to supply their forces, because the most important part of Ukraine, the heart of Ukraine, the territory between Dnipro and Zaporozhye, is under complete Russian control without any chances for any gas station or any object of fuel or energy infrastructure to survive. So this is the situation, and we understand that these gas stations that we have just discussed aren't the last gas stations that the Russians destroyed. The Russians will continue this process. The Russians will continue attacking gas stations through the eastern parts of Ukraine, through the territory to the east of the river of Dnipro. And when Russians finish this process, we believe that the Russians would move further in the direction of the central part of Ukraine, and the Russians will begin attacking gas stations between the cities of Odessa and Kiev, so the central part of Ukraine. So, of course, let's wait and see what is going to happen next, but the situation is getting worse and worse. The situation continues deteriorating. Now let's discuss the situation through the southern regions in the Crimean direction. Let's call it like this. If you remember, these days we received lots of updates about the situation on the territory of the Kinburn Spit. And if you remember, several days ago, pro-Ukrainian sources published a video where we could see how the Ukrainians raised the Ukrainian flag on the territory of the city of Pokrovska, and several pro-Ukrainian sources stated and confirmed some landing operation in the area, but nothing like this happened. Furthermore, several days after, pro-Russian sources published another video where we also could see flags raised by Russians, and one of these flags was raised on the territory of the building where the Ukrainians dropped their flag with a drone. So we see that the Russians control the situation on the territory of the Kinburn Spit. The situation there is quite difficult because this territory is under very heavy fire from the Ukrainian side of the Dnieper estuary. The Ukrainians attacked the territory of the Kinburn Spit from the area of the city of Ochakov, so the situation is quite difficult, and many sources reported that probably the Ukrainians are planning or were planning a landing operation with the purpose to establish flags through the Kinburn Spit and to receive a significant media victory. Of course, the Russians control the situation, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians published a very important video from the area of the settlement of Parutina. And in this video, we can see how the Russians, as a result of a reconnaissance operation, managed to discover a military camp of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians managed to discover big storage of boats that most likely the Ukrainians were planning to use for landing operation. And when the Russians discovered this military camp and warehouses with significant number of boats, the Russians attacked this territory, and as a result of attack, this camp, this basically military base was completely destroyed. So most likely the Ukrainians began collecting and concentrating boats and personnel in this area with the purpose to start a landing operation or any special operation when everything is ready with the Kinburn Spit. But the Russians discovered this concentration of boats, and the Russians destroyed this territory. As the distance between this camp and the Kinburn Spit itself is less than 30 kilometers, which means that probably this is exactly the camp that the Ukrainians were planning to use for possible landing operation. But another important thing, that most likely this is not the only camp that the Ukrainians have in this area. Most likely there should be more camps in the area of Berezan estuary and probably in the area of the settlements of Pavdione, so everywhere along the shore of the Black Sea. So most likely in coming days we will receive more videos like this when Russians would attack and destroy storages of boats and military camps along the Ukrainian shore of the Black Sea. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians continued attacking objects of military and energy infrastructure on the territory of the city of Zaporozhye. And this video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see a video of how exactly the Russians were attacking gas stations through the city of Zaporozhye. Here we have gas stations destroyed. These gas stations were destroyed not during the previous 24 hours, they were destroyed several days ago, but just now the Russians published a video about this. Furthermore, during the day, the Russians attacked the city of Zaporozhye with bombs, lots of explosions, and lots of videos were published on this matter. The Russians are trying to destroy and to reduce Ukraine's military capabilities, their logistic capabilities, with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to change their plans regarding the Zaporozhye counter-offensive operation, and with the purpose to reduce the Ukrainian military and defense capabilities of the cities of Orikhiv and Zaporozhye, of course. And it seems that the Russians managed to achieve some results on this direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received significant changes on the ground in the area of the responsibilities of the Group of Forces East, and let's discuss them in details. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Group of Forces East reported that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement by the name of Novoselovka. This village is located just 11 kilometers to the northeast of the city of Orikhiv, which means that the Russians continue tightening the news. We have significant changes that were provided both by the Ministry of Defense, by the Group of Forces East, and by several pro-Russian sources. And of course, a video with dozens of flags was published by Russians during the previous 24 hours. And in this video, we can see how the Russians were fighting for the settlement of Novoselovka. Lots of explosions, lots of episodes of clashes were published by pro-Russian sources. And during the final part of this video, we can see at least four flags raised by Russians. One of them was raised through the western parts of the city. Two of them were raised through the eastern parts of the settlement, and one of the flags was raised through the southeastern part. Based on this video, based on the reports, we have adjusted the map. Now it's become clear that most likely the Russians would continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Yegorovka, and then Russians most likely would continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Amelnik. And if the Ukrainians, as a result of the Russian offensive operation, lose control over these territories, this is going to be the beginning of the end for the city of Orikhiv, because from these positions the Russians would cut physically several logistic lines, several logistic arteries that the city of Orikhiv used for supply purposes, and the Russians from these positions would be able to establish fire control over the NO8 road from the northeast with drones, and this would reduce the Orikhiv logistic capabilities significantly. Furthermore, I would like to remind you and to point your attention that these days we received lots of updates from the southern and the southwestern parts of the city of Orikhiv as well, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. According to different pro-Russian sources, these days the Russians began another offensive operation, but this time from the south and from the southwest of the city of Orikhiv, and as a result of clashes during these days, the Russians improved their position significantly, and now it seems that the Russians are planning to move further in the direction of the western and the southwestern parts of the Orikhiv agglomeration, just with the same purpose to establish fire control over the main logistic line NO8 that goes from the city of Orikhiv in the direction of the city of Zaporozhye. And if Russians are able to create these pincers around the city of Orikhiv, this is going to be either operational encirclement or the Orikhiv cauldron, and which would force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory further in the northwestern direction. So this is the situation. The battle for the Orikhiv agglomeration enters its decisive phase. The Russians will continue offensive operation. We expect more changes and more updates from the area along the villages of Amelnik and Yegorovka in coming days. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation through the northern Zaporozhye direction or the Dnipropetrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, another village was captured by Russians, and this is the village of Pisantsy. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 26th of June of 2026. This is the end of the 27th of June of 2026, and this is the end of the 28th. The Russians just during the previous 2 days captured two villages, Nova Skilyuvate and Pisantsy. Now, most likely, the Russians would continue their offensive operation towards the settlement of Bagdarovka. This is a small village along the river of Vovcha. Most likely, in coming days, we might see changes like this through this flank of the Dnipro breakthrough. And furthermore, we believe that in coming days, the Russians would also improve their positions, or they would try to do this through the villages of Ostapovska, Andreevska, and Bratska. These villages used to be under complete Russian control before the beginning of the Ukrainian major counter-offensive operation of the 2026. We still haven't received even a single video that could confirm Ukraine's control over these villages, but many sources reported that the villages were recaptured by the Ukrainians, so that is why we added additional contested area. But now we believe that due to the current situation and due to a current pace of Russian offensive operation, that in coming days we'll see more and more changes on the ground in the area of the villages of Ternovata, Bratska, Andreevka, and further in the northern and the northwestern direction, and probably the Russians would also try to attack the settlements of Pokrovska and Alexandrovka, and the Russians would try to establish complete control over this settlement on the Ukraine side of the river of Volcha. And I would like to remind you that since the beginning of 2026, the Ukrainians have almost completely evacuated this territory to the north of the Russian potential breakthrough area, and furthermore, the Ukrainians began consolidating and concentrating of their troops through these territories with the purpose to repel any possible Russian offensive operation. And as we discussed during the previous videos, just since the beginning of May of 2026, probably dozens of explosions and strikes were recorded through the settlement of Vasilievka that the Ukrainians used as a logistic hub for the redeployment of troops from the western parts of Ukraine in the direction of the line of combat contact. The Ukrainians most likely would try to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Russians to get the river of Dnipro, and it seems that this is something inevitable, and maybe even this year we will start receiving videos of first artillery strikes along the river of Dnipro between the cities of Zaporozhye and Dnipro itself. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation through the Slaviansk-Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything neither from the area of the city of Konstantinovka and the city of Liman, just additional reports published by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation about the situation on the ground, but at the same time we received small changes to the west of the settlement of Alexandrovka, and these are the changes between the dates. Pro-Russian sources published this video where we can see how the Russians were attacking strongholds of the armored forces of Ukraine to the west of the settlement of Alexandrovka. We can see close combat right exactly at this point, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. The Russians continue approaching towards the settlement of Orikhiv, and this settlement is a very important one because this is the settlement where the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal goes below the surface. So as you can see, the canal itself goes between the rivers of Seversky Donetsk and further in the southern direction, and mainly this canal is on the surface, but there are several places where canal goes through pipelines or below the surface, and this village is one of these places, which means that if Russians take under complete control the settlement of Orikhiv, this means that the Russians would not need additional tools or additional equipment to cross this canal itself, which means that the Russians using using this corridor would be able to concentrate additional forces right in front of the area between the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk, which means that this village of Orikhiv is becoming a vital point, a focal point of the July military campaign between the Russians and the Ukrainians in this direction. If Ukrainians lose control over Orikhiv and over this corridor, the Russians from these positions could continue offensive operation further in the direction of the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk. And we need to understand that for Russians, as of this stage of the special military operation, even more important just to show first Russian troops and first Russian flags through the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration than even a real progress on the ground. And this is what the Russians would try to do. The Russians would try, if the village of Orikhiv falls in Russia's hands, the next thing we would see dozens of sabotage and reconnaissance groups sent in the direction of the city just with one purpose, to show as many as possible flags through the suburbs and outskirts of the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk, with the purpose to make panic and to show the Russians, population of Russia, and the Ukrainians, and the military Ukrainians, and the Western media, that the main battle for the Donbas Arc operation begins. Now let's move further and let's talk about the northern directions. During the previous 24 hours, no changes were recorded, but a lot of strikes, a lot of attacks carried out by Russians, and the clashes on the area of the village of Zemlyany Yar. Another important thing is the Ukrainian massive attack during the previous 24 hours. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians launched hundreds of drones deep inside of the territory of Russia, and the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that during the night the Russians destroyed 213 drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. Another important thing is that the Ukrainians this time were attacking mainly the main direction of attack was the southern direction, and the Ukrainians were attacking the settlement by the name of Slaviansk na Kubani. And more precisely, the Ukrainians were attacking this oil refinery. And as a result of attack, this oil refinery was significantly damaged by the Ukrainian attack. Several fuel tanks were destroyed completely, and we have lots of videos on this matter. Here we can see these oil tanks, fuel tanks on the territory of the refinery that were destroyed completely. We can see fire crews that are trying to extinguish the fire and to stabilize the situation. And the most important thing, we have a satellite picture where we can see approximately oil refineries, oil tanks probably, that were destroyed as a result of attack. And we can see that probably up to 5 or 6 oil tanks were destroyed by the Ukrainians as a result of the massive attack that took place between the 27th and the 28th of June of 2026. Here we have lots of videos published by local sources, by locals on this matter. And obviously this strike, the destruction of this oil refinery, will only worsen the oil crisis, the fuel crisis that is currently taking place on the territory of Russia. Furthermore, today, during the 28th of June of 2026, we received a video, pictures of consequences of attack on another military plant on the territory of the city of Volgograd. The Ukrainians yesterday attacked the city of Volgograd, and today we received first pictures where we can see that at least one barrack was completely destroyed. We're talking about this facility, so this is what left from this barrack as a result of the Ukrainian attack that took place yesterday. And the Ukrainians were attacking this barrack with cruise missiles or Flamingo jet drones. The Ukrainians were using something powerful. So this is the situation. Let's wait and see what is going to happen next. Obviously something big is going to happen, because today we received the report that the talks between the President of the Republic of Belarus and Russia, and that's they took place for 2 days. The leaders of these two countries were talking a lot about the situation, and most likely they were talking a lot about the Belarusian participation in the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Most likely the President of Belarus received certain guarantees from the Russian side that if anything happens, then the Russians would provide full-scale defense and full-scale retaliation on anyone, on anybody who is going to make any provocations against the Republic of Belarus. And I would like to remind you that according to ultimatum issued by Zelensky, the Belarusians, at least for this period of time, were forced to turn off the equipment along the border between the Republic of Belarus and Ukraine. But at the same time, we see that the Russians stopped using massive attacks. The Russians right now use average attacks every day, but we see that these attacks that the Russians carry out from day to day probably even bring more results than massive attacks. The Russians have destroyed significant number of gas stations, parking sites, and so on. There are still a lot of facilities that the Ukrainians are using for drone production, but obviously this is going to be the next step from the Russian side.